Cara Delevingne recently did an interview on Call Her Daddy promoting her launch as a musician. In this interview, she spoke of her childhood, coming out as gay, predators in the industry, and her substance misuse. This last piece I found particularly interesting, so I figured I'd use her story kind of like a jumping off point for a broader conversation about why people start to misuse substances in the first place. Because the field of addiction is very complex and heterogeneous, with different paths to and from addiction. But there are some common threads, and by exploring those threads, people who are struggling with this can feel a little bit less alone, or maybe people who are headed down that path can start to recognize it sooner. Let's get started. So Cara talks in the interview about how her mom struggled with substance abuse. She would be gone for periods of time when she was little to rehab, and during this time, Cara experienced her mom's absence almost like her mom was dead. The only thing she could control was her eating, so she went on hunger strike to protest her mom's absence.
It felt normal until, being at a certain age where you're told your mom's gonna die and being in hospital and being like, huh? Like, I don't understand what that means. And also the very, very physical, visceral memory of her being away a lot and, either being in hospital or in rehab of some sort. And that feeling of not knowing where she was. No one told me. So I just thought she was dead and I didn't understand. And that's when that kind of thing of like trying to control the uncontrollable would come in, where like I just would stop eating at 7 and like just be on a hunger strike because I didn't know where my mother was. So I was not gonna eat because that to me was the only thing I had control over.
It seems like we didn't really get the full story of how she got into taking substances in the first place, but by 15, she said she was experimenting quite a bit with hallucinogens. She lived in London during a time when there was a big drug scene. And she says at one point she was using daily and she had a really bad psychedelics trip that sounded a little bit like drug-induced psychosis. More on that in a second.
So what happened at 15?
I was experimenting a lot, I think, with like hallucinogens at that point, which pretty young, 13, 14. And yeah, growing up in England and London at that time, there was a lot of drugs and ketamine was very big at that point. And I think I love what drugs made me feel. I loved not having to think about my mum. I loved not having to feel the pressure of not being good at school because I couldn't focus or concentrate. The pressure of not feeling like I was good at anything or good enough or love myself, all of that, it went away. And what drugs really gave me at that point, which is what I was desperately looking for, was connection. It wasn't real. I mean, it is to some extent, but it's not. It's there, it's tangible, but it's not deep enough, right? For what you really need, maybe what you want. But I loved that part and I loved the friends I had and the music and the, breaking into, it was just like such an amazing period. But then, especially with things like hallucinogens and when your brain is not formed yet, I just remember having a really bad trip where I thought that, that my dad was God and my mum was the devil and I had to kill her to save the end of the world. Like I lost my mind. And at the end of that trip, though, I thought that Bill Murray, Tim Curry, and Jim Carrey were the same person, and I'm still convinced that they might be.
Okay.
I don't know. Acid is a crazy thing.
To be determined.
But I also was taking it like every day. Like I was doing it a lot. I was so confused because I also didn't have a great relationship with my dad at that point. But suddenly something started to switch where I was like, maybe my mom's actually not in the right here and my dad's actually not in the wrong, and why do I hate him and protect her so fiercely in life? Like what? I think my whole world exploded and I was like, I think everything I've thought for the last 15 years is wrong. Yeah, I would just try and knock myself out physically and that is why I think that same feeling was why I started having a bad relationship with drugs, was because I just wanted to knock myself out.
Yeah, and escape.
Then later in her career as a model, Cara also says she didn't feel like she belonged in the industry, in part because she wasn't being authentic to herself, she wasn't out as gay, and she was numbing that with drugs.
It's also an identity thing. I'm like, who the hell? I haven't processed any of this yet. This is all a mess. And none of these things or all of them, I really felt like such a shell at that point and a real like I remember writing a lot about how I just was a mirror of everyone I'd ever met, and there was nothing underneath it. I was just an empty vessel. Not to be depressing about it, but especially with dating, oh my God, yeah, it's rough because, again, I didn't want to be gay. I really wanted to fit in with people in, like, I didn't know any gay people.
So already, just based on this, Cara has listed off a lot of the common reasons why people start using and misusing substances in the first place and why they continue to do so. One very common risk factor is parental addiction. People sometimes call addiction a genetic disease. I don't really love that. I think it's a lot more complicated than that. It's not like there's one addiction gene. Addiction is about 50% heritable, which is around the same rate as like most mental health diagnoses. While there is certainly a genetic component, you're not doomed to addiction just because there's a family history of it. Rather, I think a big reason why kids of addicted parents end up having addiction struggles of their own is because they watched it growing up. In most cases, there's going to be some childhood experience that unlocks the genetic vulnerability that's there. Parents very strongly model for their kids how to behave. Monkey see, monkey do. If a child watches you brushing your teeth, they're going to try pretend brushing their teeth because they think it's funny. If they're, grabbing the cat by its tail and you start to pet the cat softly, then they also start to pet the cat softly. So as you can imagine, watching a parent misuse substances over and over again while you're a child during a time when your brain is extremely moldable, it makes it very tempting to kind of follow in their footsteps. So having a parent who struggles with substance misuse themselves is a big risk factor because of that. Another reason why people start doing drugs is because they're glorified, especially during teenagehood, especially during certain scenes like the music scene, which it seems like Cara was a really big part of. Like, music is obviously really important to her. Most teens want to exercise some independence because they've been told their whole lives what to do, and they're finally getting close to that age where they're old enough to make some decisions for themselves. So doing something that they're not allowed to do, that maybe the cool kids are doing, that society tends to glamorize, that can be very alluring for teenagers. Plus, at that age, they usually struggle with very intense feelings because of what's going on for them neurologically, and most of them don't yet have the tools to regulate their emotions because, let's be real, most parents and most schools don't teach that shit. And they're also more impulsive at that age because their prefrontal cortex is not developed. So substances are a welcome reprieve from these powerful, painful feelings, and they're less able to sort of pause and think about whether this is something they really want to do. And sometimes that really is like the only catalyst. Sometimes a person will dabble in drugs because they want to look cool, or because they're young, or because they want to try something new. And depending on the specific substance and their specific nervous system, it might be enough to get them hooked. So even if you have no pre-existing traumas or psychological complexes, there are substances like opiates that even the strongest, most fully formed adult is still incredibly vulnerable to once they start dabbling in it. And a teenager, you can only imagine how much more of a powerful hold that has on them. But more times than not, there is also some sort of trauma history and or psychological reason why a person reaches for that substance in the first place, or why they continue to reach for that substance. Cara alluded to a lot of the big hitters, one of them being family trauma. In her case, early attachment ruptures from her mom, with whom she seems to be very close, which she experienced as her mom dying. It's hard for a child to understand what's happening when their parent suddenly goes away. And also watching her mom's own battles with substances can be deeply traumatizing. Obviously, this is just one example. There's really no shortage of types of family trauma that could lead a person to emotional pain and eventually drugs. Another reason Cara mentioned, I loved what drugs made me feel. You can learn a lot about a person based on what is their substance of choice. Like, someone who struggles with social awkwardness might find a stimulant really enjoyable because they finally are able to socialize normally the way it feels like other people do. Someone who can't turn off their brain or worries might find that alcohol or a different kind of downer is just a really good way to go with the flow and relax for once, to not be constantly enslaved by their thoughts. Sometimes what a substance makes a person feel is something that they really are chasing even in their sober life, a feeling that they're for some reason not not able to get in touch with, or a feeling that they're trying to use to balance out a different painful feeling. Cara also says that drugs provided connection for her. And substances can induce feelings of closeness and trust, especially, substances like MDMA, or they can lower inhibitions like alcohol does, making it easier to connect with people and be vulnerable. And vulnerability is essentially what creates intimacy. For people who are otherwise afraid of people or of human connection, that can feel like a high in and of itself. You're not just enjoying the substance, you're also enjoying the connection that comes with it. But like Cara pointed out, it's not real. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I have been bonding with a woman in the bathroom at an EDM concert and exchanged numbers and thought, oh, this is great, I met someone I could be friends with, only to realize the next day that when she got sober, she had zero intention of becoming my friend. And it's like, why? Like, did they not mean it when they were under the influence of the substance, or like what was going on? Because it feels like a way of artificially inducing those feelings of trust, of closeness, of intimacy. And so in some sense, if you can't really have that when you're sober, is it real? People also tend to use substances to avoid painful thoughts and feelings. Cara said she wasn't thinking about her mom for once when she was using substances. She also mentioned she was using substances to cope with feelings of inauthenticity and not belonging, and dealing with identity issues. Identity issues are very commonly something that attracts people to substance misuse, because identity issues aren't like some transient emotion state that will pass in a few minutes or maybe a few days. They're with you pretty constantly. That feeling she referenced of feeling empty, like a shell, like a mirror, or hiding the fact that she was gay, that was likely with her 100% of the time. And substances might have just provided a temporary relief from the pain of that she had to deal with every single day. For some people, substance misuse reflects a lack of toolbox of how to regulate their emotions, a fear of painful emotions, kind of like this aversion to pain, or like this desire to avoid painful feelings, what's sometimes called a coping deficit. But like Cara herself learned, that doesn't work long term. You're just rolling the ball further down the road, but you're still going to have to deal with it. Like the metaphor I always use, imagine like a beach ball. You try to push it underwater, it's going to pop back up even stronger. What you don't want to address in the short term is going to become a long-term problem. And lastly, she said, I just wanted to knock myself out. Sometimes substance use is also an expression of self-harm, or an expression of an unconscious death wish, as Freud called it, which apparently Cara did also sometimes struggle with at points in her life. This is the part that gets kind of dark. Sometimes substances are a way of us achieving unconsciousness. Almost like a person doesn't want to be here experiencing reality, almost like they wish they were comatose or worse. And the substances are, of course, negatively harming their health. So on some level, a person must unconsciously want that. They must not care if they're here or not. So those are some of the common reasons why people start and continue to misuse drugs. But I want to also touch on something else that she shared that I found pretty fascinating, which was her bad trip on shrooms at age 15. Cara shared how during the trip she became convinced that her dad was God and her mom was the devil. And the backstory there is that at the time she was really close with her mom and she didn't have a great relationship with her dad, and suddenly it felt like the world as she knew it was sort of upside down. Now, I don't know if this was something she experienced only during the bad trip itself, or whether it persisted once she sobered up as well. If it happened afterwards too, it might have counted as something called drug-induced psychosis. But regardless, whether it was just, psychosis that's normal to experience during a psychedelic trip, or drug-induced psychosis that lasted longer, whenever someone experiences psychosis, people tend to just dismiss the symptoms as irrelevant. Like, whatever, they're psychotic. What does it matter what their delusions are? In reality, the contents of a person's psychotic delusions can be pretty revealing. And the same is true of OCD themes. Like, people think, it's just a, neurochemical phenomenon. Who cares what exactly the themes of a person's OCD are? But the contents of people's obsessions and compulsions are often also triggered by past experiences and traumas. Like, someone with OCD might experience illness anxiety because their dad died when they were young, or they might experience body dysmorphia if their mom was very critical of their body growing up. Even if a person was always genetically predisposed to developing OCD, life experience determined which exact themes to trigger. In this case, based on the limited knowledge that we have of Cara's transient psychosis, what can we learn about our internal world? Psychedelics are renowned for showing people what they refuse to look at in a very blatant, not so subtle way. So if Cara was at that time idealizing her mom and devaluing her dad to an extent, then the psychedelics may have flipped the roles and done it in a very hyperbolic way, where her mom was the devil and her dad was God, so that she would get the message loud and clear. Your parents do not fit in the all good and all bad roles that you previously thought. Because look, the roles are flipped now, and doesn't it feel super real? So wasn't it silly to be so convinced of your mom's perfection and your father's imperfection? direction. In essence, the psychedelics may have been challenging her splitting. But again, I know very little about this based on just, what she shared in this interview. So I'm just theorizing here. The point is that even drug-induced psychosis can reveal very psychologically rich information about a person. And lastly, Cara shared a little bit about why abstinence-based treatment modalities like AA and NA aren't the right fit for her.
There's a narrative, right, about addiction that is, abstinence is the most important thing, and it's very rigid. I don't do well with that. But they also will tell you, addicts always think they're different. You're always going to think you are the one that's going to cheat the system and da-da-da-da. For sure, I feel that way. I know it's not healthy. I know I have to combat that sometimes. But I also know that that system for me hadn't worked in the past. It didn't. There's a part of it where whether it's, I've decided I'm going to try and microdose a mushroom, right? In previous iterations of sobriety, that would take me down. That my count has gone back to 0 again. I'm not sober. I can't call myself a sober person. Then that cycle of guilt and shame, I'm done now. I'm not sober. So now I'm fucked up and now I'm going to do drugs, was so strong and such a pull that I also, in my head, when I'm told I can't do something, when I have the option to go, I could go have a beer, but I choose not to. The power I have in that is something I would never have realized I could get. The whole thing of you cannot do anything because this will happen and this, it was too, I would prefer to, I don't feel like they're mistakes, but I would prefer to toe a line of, I'm not trying to walk an edge. I'm never trying to go back to what I was doing. My priority is clarity, sobriety to the utmost, and loving myself. And so I never want to go back to that place. But I also think just pretending it doesn't exist and never seeing it and never doing it isn't how I get there.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The black and white mentality of abstinence-based treatment modalities can seriously backfire on certain populations. Like Cara alluded to, maybe you break total abstinence by having a beer or something. You experience intense guilt and shame because now you no longer have this label of abstinent. And then you binge because, what's the point? You already feel like you've done something horrible. Plus, anytime there's an abstinence approach to something, it gives it kind of this forbidden fruit phenomenon where as human beings, we're naturally going to want what's forbidden. For some people, abstinence might truly be the only route, for someone who has extremely low impulse control, especially once they have even a tiny bit of a substance, people who will have one drink and it automatically turns into a bender. People with severe addiction who have failed at more moderate approaches and continue to use even after extreme consequences, even after reaching their rock bottom. People who tend to backslide. Maybe one week they can have just a drink or two, but the next week they're already having an extra drink, and then the week after that, and then again and again until eventually they're back to heavy use. People who use highly dangerous substances like fentanyl who can't afford to even slip just once because it's really dangerous too. But for other populations, abstinence-based modalities can actually aggravate things, and if that's the case, harm reduction treatment modalities actually have very strong effectiveness. Not everyone needs abstinence. Some people are capable of mastering moderation, have never developed physiological dependence on a substance, have only misused substances during a period in their life, be it during college when it was somewhat culturally normal, or when they had a particular friend group that liked to party, or during a period of mental turmoil, or maybe they didn't misuse substances as severely as other people who really should be abstinent. Now, the issue, of course, is that a lot of people who probably should be in the abstinence group will kid themselves and say, I can practice moderation, it's fine, even when it's not really a viable option for them. Of course, they don't want to give up on the substance entirely, but unfortunately, they usually learn sooner or later that they will need to. If they want to have a healthy relationship with substances, they're going to need to just stay away from them. And if you are trying to figure out in which of these categories you are, whether you should be abstinent or a harm reduction approach is a better fit for you, please do not just go based on this video. You should really have a team of professionals guiding you on your specific situation. This is some very serious stuff we're talking about. But Cara mentioned something really important. She briefly referenced that she values her health and she wouldn't want to jeopardize that. This is the key. When you fix the value value alignment, the behavioral change follows. Like somebody who is misusing substances and hurting their body is fundamentally not in touch with the values of health or self-respect. But if you can get them to a place where they truly value and respect their body and they want to live as long as possible and they love their life, the unhealthy behaviors will naturally start to shed. When I first started healing my eating disorder, I experienced a shift at one point where I started to actually care about my health. And before that, I'll be honest, I really didn't give a fuck. I really didn't. Like, I knew that something bad could befall me. I didn't think it was going to happen to me because I was young and I thought myself immortal. But at the same time, I do think I also had that unconscious death wish that I was talking about. Once I started to care about my health, to value myself as a person, I started thinking about food in terms of what does this do for my health rather than how many calories are in this. So before, where I would have maybe picked like a low calorie snack that was highly processed and unhealthy, once I tapped into me valuing my own body, it was an easy choice. Like, it wasn't even a difficult choice to have to choose between like rice crackers or a piece of fruit, even if the fruit had more calories. So abstinence or no abstinence, the important piece is that people struggling with addiction must learn to cope differently with their emotions, to respect their bodies, to delay impulses that they have, to find connection in other ways, to resolve whatever complexes are driving the addiction in the first place, and ultimately to be in touch with why they want to keep living and be healthy as long as possible. Once that last piece is achieved, the behavioral change feels so much easier. Saying no to a substance feels so much easier. Let me know what you thought about this, and thank you for watching.
Tell me.